Hello, everybody.
Okay.
For those of you that don't know us, we're Conscious, or Masego and Stella, and I guess we started a kind of passion project together that was talking about sustainability, slow fashion, and living in South Africa, and then also sharing people's stories that we found inspiring. And we're joined by Emma, who is a gender policy and climate adaptation specialist. Sorry, my mouth. And Nyambo, who is the founder of fashion and storytelling brand Masa Mara.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very casual conversation today. We're going to be chatting all about thrifting and the nuances of the secondhand industry and all of those good things. And we're so glad that Emma and Nyambo are going to be joining us and sharing their perspectives on that. And we encourage you to ask questions and engage with us, because we do want this to be a learning space for everybody. We have learned from our own mistakes and are still learning, and it's by no means a we know everything type of panel. So yeah, join us in chatting about thrifting. And to kick off the conversation, just to give some context, we're going to each be sharing our personal relationship to thrifting and kind of how we got into it. And then we'll go into some questions for Emma and Nyambo slightly later on. Yeah, Masego, do you want to start us off with your thrift journey?
Okay. So I started thrifting at a pretty young age. Or I wore a lot of pre-loved clothes because that was sort of the way that my mom brought me up. And so I never knew that there was like a stigma around it until I got into the slow fashion space, where everybody kept talking about like, oh, there was such a stigma against buying secondhand, and that's why I like struggled with that before. And I was like, oh, there's a stigma around it. But for me, it was like a way of getting interesting clothing and just something that my mom had always done. So I kind of followed along. And then as I got more into it, I think there was a time where I over consumed secondhand and bought a lot of things that were unnecessary, that I was like, oh, this is cute for like just a picture, but not necessarily beyond that. And so my journey with secondhand has been like trying to better understand like my consumption levels around it, as well as I guess like I've made mistakes like buying menswear or like pieces that are like oversized or whatever. And yeah, so I think that's kind of where I'm coming from.
On my side, similarly, my mom dressed me in hand-me-downs a lot when I was growing up, and I don't remember having a strong opinion about it, but I think when in my mid-teens is when I started thrifting, I guess intentionally, like for my own style. And at the time it was more just because I was enchanted by old things and by stories behind things, and I really liked the idea that I would be wearing something that nobody else would have, but it didn't come from like a mainstream store. And it was always such a nice conversation started. Somebody would ask me about my jacket and I'd be able to say, oh, I got it from this market or this place. So that was really cool. And it was only many years later, when I intentionally started my slow fashion journey, that I really then realized that buying secondhand it has benefits for the planet and for elongating lifespans of clothing and all of that sort of more political side of thrifting. And yeah, like Masego said, I've also had stages of over-consuming secondhand. I was just like, as long as it's secondhand, you can buy as much as you want. But I think where I am now in my journey, I'm really trying to redefine my relationship with clothing and consumption, and acknowledge that we can all be more than just consumers, and that like at the root of the fashion industry's problem really is an issue of overconsumption, regardless of whether it's new or secondhand. So yeah, I think that has also been my journey. And
I think also I would want to say is that like our journeys in secondhand are a place of like privilege.
Yes.
We're like small sized people and stuff, and so why we love like the people that we've invited to speak is because their experiences are also different to ours. So yeah, so I'd like maybe Nyambo, do you want to go first?
Yes, I can go. So good. Yeah. So my journey, like with secondhand, I mean, like I'm from East Africa. In East Africa, in Rwanda, but the whole East Africa is really big and known, with secondhand clothing. It's so growing up for me, there was no choice. The only choice that I had was secondhand. To a point where anything that I could wear, anything, all was secondhand. It was not choice. It was what was surrounded us, and also anything else that we could be able to buy. It was the last quality that anyone could, no one could really, no one ever wanted to wear such things because it was plastic and it was a garment that you would wear today and tomorrow is tired. So from there, with such background and having that, of course, the only dream that I always had was to one day I can't wait to be that one person, the person who wears the garment, as the first person to wear the garment, so and that has been, something for me now, looking also, within, of course, secondhand, where it's coming from, it's gotten to me, I started repairing and rejecting secondhand, the moment I was able, to wear a garment, to be the first to feel that love with the garment and connect, know that you are the first person, or have that choice saying that I can actually afford to wear this, or I can be the first person to wear this. So yeah, so that's where I'm more in short of the journey with me with the secondhand. So when I arrived, so yeah, basically that's for now.
That's perfect. Yeah, and it's really interesting to hear you speak about that, because as we mentioned before, we each have our our own perspectives on secondhand, and it's really a lot to do with where we come from and how that has been taught us as the idea of, in the slow fashion community, it's really advocated for as the best way to buy, because you are prolonging the lifespan of clothing. But for people that come from different countries and different backgrounds, that's not always the case. Everybody has their own experiences with secondhand. Yeah.
And own reasonings for wanting to buy.
Yeah.
So we wanted to keep that in mind.
Yes.
And then Emma. Oh, sorry.
Okay, cool. Now, so I just quickly wanted to add. So the other thing as well. So I just said, let me quickly, let me add it quickly. So it's just that, so in where I'm coming from, where I come from, secondhand is hugely promoted to a point where even now when you create something, it doesn't seem of any value, to secondhand. People will really look at you and see no value, see no quality, so nothing. Even no matter how you try by your means to give the good quality of your product, but secondhand is so marketed in a way that people don't look anywhere else but secondhand. But of course, I'm so lucky. I mean, from my, of course, my from where I'm coming from, that certain secondhands, because when you look at it, it doesn't. When we're doing secondhand, it's not coming within from us. Within from the people of the continent of Africa. So most of secondhands are things that are being come from outside of Africa. So therefore, from my side, so it's always felt like it was a way of Africa cleaning up, for the the rest of the world. And for me, it lost the value. And then I was so lucky enough that from where I'm from, my country, that they had to put a stop to that, where no secondhand is allowed, to come within the country, So therefore, we can try to uplift, our local production and stuff. So yeah, I just thought, let me quickly, add that, but we can continue the other conversation.
Thank you so much. Emma, would you like to share your story?
Sure, and Masego, you'll be thrilled to see that Lilith has joined me. Lilith is, Masego's a big fan of my cat. Yeah, so my kind of background into thrifting is My mom has a garment production background. So I was kind of always raised with an appreciation for well-made clothes and trans-seasonal style, and a lot of the kind of classic like global north brands that were investment pieces and the like. And kind of when I was growing up into my teens kind of thing, the only way you could get a lot of those brands, it was like pre-Millionaires Row at the waterfront and pre those being easily accessible, the only way you could get many of those brands was secondhand via swaps and things like that for the people who had gone overseas, bought it then, and then come back maybe a few seasons down the line, which was still fine because at that stage South Africa had at least a 1-year lag on all the seasons, the good old days. And so it kind of was raised in appreciation of that and kind of picking up pieces here and there, and also kind of the era when obviously there was kind of secondhand as we know it now, but a lot of it was kind of branded as vintage, and it was kind of a lot of the kind of vintage pieces, the older pieces, things like that. So kind of picked up a few items along the way, but then really only got into kind of thrifting and kind of secondhand market as we kind of know it at the moment when I was in high school, when my mom and I got involved with Chic Mamas Do Care, which is a like when it first started, which is a local Cape Town and Joburg, originally Cape Town, essentially like Oxfam model of secondhand clothes that are then resold with the proceeds going to educational projects, and got involved with there as volunteers for quite a few years through the rest of my high school and kind of into early university. And through that, it was kind of also seeing the evolution of going from a lot of kind of overseas luxury high value brands, and then kind of the local kind of more prestige but like department store brands, to now kind of seeing a lot of influx of those fast fashion international brands that are now saturating a lot of that secondhand market, that even the thrifting and swaps don't quite have the appeal that they did 10 years ago, where the quality of clothes was much nicer and they were a lot more timeless pieces. There's a lot, I have the sense that there's a lot more kind of poor quality, fast fashion, trendy style turnover items at the moment. Yeah, so that's my thrift background, and I'll put a pin in it there before I keep talking.
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing, Emma. And I think we'll go into a few questions now, but if anybody in the audience also has questions to ask our panelists or us, I guess, then please just feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat, and then we will, yeah, field those. But now that we've kind of understood where everybody's backgrounds in thrifting came from, and our perspectives, I guess, and how our worldviews have been shaped, we wanted to ask Nyambo a bit more about how, yeah, your experience growing up with secondhand, like you said, has influenced your journey as a designer and starting your own brand, and how it, yeah, influenced that, inspired that. Just tell us a bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, of course,
your journey.
Yes, I mean, of course, like I said, from someone who never had that choice of being able to be the first one to wear the garment. Of course, I grew up with such, desire and dream, for me, to be able to create something, or to be able, so when I, found myself in fashion, I told myself that, I'll try by all means to be that brand that at least allows the African, child, to through my storytelling, and try and also show them the love of actually of what they have, that we don't have to be the second at all time, so you can be the first. And that's why, it's a core, fun, of my brand, trying to make sure that we tell that African story, we add the value to, to who we are, and also making sure that, we don't deserve to be the second one as African, people. So, yeah, so therefore, of course, I try, at all time to be advocate and the voice of Africa through my clothing, and making sure that we uplift Africa, of course, and see if we can actually change and add value to what we do.
Yeah,
if I
I
can.
think that's, yeah, Emma,
Sorry.
please.
And I think that speaks to an important point about the idea that, like, oh, the secondhand clothes, and it's not like you want to feel special about the clothes that you're wearing and you want them to be special to you. And I think that links into the idea that there's this false conception of, once you've donated clothes, if you're the person donating clothes, your slate is clean and you've done this magnanimous good deed, and you got positive karma points and all that thing, where that's not the case. Especially if, I don't think that's the case if you donate your clothes in perfect condition. If the attitude behind it is paternalistic in any way, if the attitude behind it is, well, I'm donating so I can go buy new things, or, oh, that's not trendy anymore, or but like someone else will enjoy this. Like, if that's the attitude, certainly not. And then even more certainly not if you're not donating them in a good condition. If they're full of holes, if they're torn, if they're stretched out and pulled and all those sorts of things, you're just it's just, I think it's super patronizing, for one. And then it's also just creating issues down the line of, you're then transferring the responsibility of either responsibly disposing of those clothes to someone else, or the cost and the burden and the admin of repairing them or cleaning them and things like that. And I think there's a attitude, and when you're donating good quality clothes, that's one thing. And when you're doing that with fast fashion, poor quality trend items, it's even worse. If you're not continuing to take responsibility and to hold responsibility for your clothes throughout the cycle, that's really the attitude that then ends up creating this stigma attached to secondhand clothes. Because if the stigma is they're dirty, they're torn, they're someone else's, they're disposable throwaways, then that just perpetuates that stigma. Things like that, rather than saying like, oh, I'm taking this garment that's in a good quality and was appreciated before me, and then I'm appreciating it myself and taking good care of it, and then either passing it along to someone else still in a good condition, or turning it into something else, or recycling it in a sustainable manner. Like, we need to be responsible kind of throughout that process, which I think will then also help to affect the kind of mindset around what wearing secondhand clothes means. Whether it's disposable or whether it's like responsible.
Yeah, I mean, actually, to add from what Emma's saying, definitely. So also another thing is this now, when it comes to secondhand, like I said earlier, it's over, marketed in a way that, it actually shadows, the local brands, therefore, we don't see that value within our local. So I always say, if we can take that, and I mean, knowing, the local brands, I mean, are always, slow fashion, like, no matter how we try, but it's always slow fashion. So instead of just like, us, putting that energy into like, branding this, secondhand thrifting, however vintage, how we call it, if we could take the energy, at least even half of that energy, and then, put it into, marketing our, our local brands, we could also, have impactful, in our, everyday lives, regarding to fashion, yeah. So just I think we just have to try to look at of course, and also when you look at it, it's the biggest, secondhand had become the biggest sort of like business. It's no longer donated things that you are being donated. It's people import in masses, so, and then we're flooding Africa with it, so therefore I mean, I don't know how even the local brands are even surviving because of if such are coming. And if you look at it, it's being donated and people are doing business with it, and then it's becoming expensive. So at the end of the day, I mean, from my side, I found it hard to see the actually the impact of it within Africa. I always say, from my side, I think it will be a best thing if like we start thrifting from one another, right? Instead of just like importing secondhand, and then let's Europe, or America, wherever, thrift amongst them. Therefore, and then we also try to thrift amongst us. So in that way, we can have a balance, not cleaning up, from wherever, So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like listening to this conversation, we're almost getting a sense of the power relations in the global secondhand trade, and it's something that I've only learnt about relatively recently. Just sort of the global nature of secondhand supply chains and the power relations between different countries in the global north and the global south. And the word that kept coming up for me, or the phrase that kept coming up for me as Emma and Nyambo, you were both speaking, is this idea of waste colonialism, which the All Foundation, who does a lot of work in Ghana, speaks a lot about. And it's basically the idea that waste from the global north is being dumped in countries in the global south, and it essentially becomes their problem. And like Nyam was speaking about, it suffocates local textile industries, and it really takes away a lot of opportunities in those countries. And in a lot of ways, those countries are finding ways to, creatively deal with that waste, but because of the volume and the amount of imports and the fact that it's a huge business, it's not just charitable donations coming to countries and being given to people that need clothing. It's really way beyond that because of the extent of production in the fashion industry. It's creating circular economies that we should look at as models of circularity and really appreciate the work that's being done there, but never romanticize it, because it still is people in the global south dealing with waste that is not theirs and dealing with the extreme burden of that and the extreme consequences of that waste. So yeah, I think that's kind of what was coming up for me.
I just can't eloquently say it like that.
I just wanted to string it together because I'm not sure how much people attending know about sort of the behind the scenes of
But also I think
okay, cool.
I was going to say something that I've forgotten.
I wanted to ask Nyambo briefly, do you remember like a time before secondhand, or do people speak about a time before the secondhand industry in Rwanda like sort of took over the local textile industry and like the thriving nature of that? Do people have memories of that, or is it just really like the only thing that people speak about is secondhand? Like, are there aspirations about that?
Yeah, I mean, you see, that's actually there's not even, a time before that, I mean, anyone that I've managed to speak to, my parents and those who, before them, they all have known secondhand. That's how big it has been, and then I'm sure anyone in East Africa or West, can, tell you that, it has been so big, and it's dated a lot, back, to a point where that's one thing that's the only thing that they know, so to a point where, like I said, when one creates, like, no matter how, no matter where you get your highest quality, it always comes second, to those of secondhand. That's how far it's dated, so yeah, from my side, definitely, I mean, I don't know any time before. I can't even, like, from people I speak, there's no time before secondhand. It always has been there. That's how far it's dated, and yeah, I mean, from me, we need to put value to ourselves. We need really to understand that, we are more better than, becoming the second, citizens at all the time, and to do that is just to empower and, show love, to our, our people. Actually, from my side, honestly, I don't see, secondhand being helpful, on African continents. Because all it does, it's of course kills people's, that hope of becoming, and feeling the importance, of it. I'm speaking from, from a child who grew up not, feeling like I deserve to, stand amongst the others and feel like, I'm worthy, of anything, because it's always so. And also having, as a child, having that dream of like, I hope one day, having that, a dream of being able to wear a garment, as the first person. No one needs to. You shouldn't be able to to feel that way. At least have the choices and options there, and we can only do that when we say, let's actually help to market and brand our local brands in a way of we can uplift them and be able for them to be able to get everywhere, so yeah, as the history before then, I don't know of any. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering about that because I think it's really important to understand like what came before, and it's really interesting to hear you say that a lot of people can speak to that or even remember what was before this kind of all-encompassing, trade of secondhand clothing. And you also speak into a level of privilege, like the privilege of being able to celebrate our local designers and to be able to invest in their work. And I think that's really something to think about, that I'm going to be thinking about too. And to shift gears slightly, I wanted to chat to Emma about privilege in the thrifting space as well, but obviously from a very different perspective. I guess from the perspective of people like us who have the privilege to thrift, which is a different life experience. And Emma, I was wondering if you could chat to us a bit about privilege in the thrifting space, and how it affects accessibility, and a few ways that we can maybe help to address this from our context.
Sure. And I obviously recognize I'm reflexive of I'm a cis white woman of a high economic quintile and stuff like that. So talking about privilege in this way is obviously, I acknowledge that. But I think the kind of point that I make is I think like privilege, thrifting is a privilege. And I think there are certain accessibility points that buying secondhand can open. And this is kind of in the, what I would call the kind of like Western model of thrifting, of like charity stores and things like that, not necessarily in the like East African bundle market kind of version. I'm talking about like thrift stores where it's relatively like already curated or donations based and stuff like that. And obviously for certain brands and things like that, there's a lower cost that might make it accessible to more people who wouldn't necessarily be able to afford it new from store when those stores are, or those brands are available. But I do think the privilege that thrifting also implies a privilege of having the time to be able to have a mental wish list in your brain about the types of things that you want to buy, to have access to those stores, particularly if you live rurally or not often. They're quite concentrated in suburbs, things like that, not necessarily in high traffic malls and things like that. To have the privilege of buying cash outright and not having to buy in credit, to have the privilege to either mend, wash, or kind of upcycle items, which is not necessarily extended to everyone. And I think that privilege is kind of gets lost in the conversation of like, oh no, thrifting is super accessible to everyone. And I don't think that's the case. And I think people that go into the mindset potentially of like where they'll do thrift hauls and, oh, I spent 500 rand and look how much stuff I got. That kind of overconsumption of anything, I think, is harmful, and it's a harmful attitude because it's still regarding clothes as disposable, and it's considering clothes as like high manufactured and kind of further alienated from the people that are creating them. And even if it is slow fashion or fast fashion, there's all clothes are handmade, like all clothes are handmade, but obviously the degree of human interaction, the degree to which those workers are being compensated fairly and things like that changes kind of depending on the brands and the manufacturing. And I think recognizing that privilege, and if you have the privilege of the time and the access and the liquidity and things like that, to thrift as a substitute for buying new, kind of if that is the counterfactual is in buying new, I think that still has an additional responsibility on it of are you shopping in a way that is sustainable? Are you shopping in a way that is cognizant of people who might have more difficulty accessing those garments? Or are you just kind of cleaning the store of all the new items that are trendy and things like that for the sake of you getting them and for the sake of that haul, even if you might wear that item once or never, or cut it up and turn it into an Instagram look or something like that? And I think that's increasingly kind of becoming apparent, and it's, I think, something that locally, because of Instagram and TikTok and social networks and stuff like that, that we're learning from the global north, which I think is quite dangerous, because I think we don't have the secondhand infrastructure like America and the UK do that can sustain that. I mean, I don't think it's sustainable in any way, but that can sustain that kind of approach. And I think that responsible thrifting is kind of recognizing, cool, just because I can buy all these items doesn't necessarily mean I should. Just because I am kind of saying like, oh, if you are, it may be hard to tell with a head and shoulders shot, but I'm a plus size woman. I'm also 5'10" and I've got a large bust. So for me, there's often very little at the thrift shop to begin with, and kind of seeing a lot of resellers and thrift flippers and things like that going in and buying large sizes and then changing it down to a crop top or taking large sizes and things, can be quite frustrating to see, to be like, oh, okay, cool, could have bought that. Especially when they're taking items that are, sorry, I'm going off on a ramble now, especially when they're taking items that are classic or transitional, like a plain white shirt or button up or plain shirt, and then turning it into something that is very trendy. And when I say trendy, I mean like very seasonal and very specific, and will be out of date in a very, like, we can look at things and be like, that's very 2020 kind of thing, is very frustrating. I think if they're taking items that are dated in a way that is not necessarily not fashionable, but not to everyone's taste at the moment, so like shirts with big shoulder pads or obnoxious buttons and stuff like that, and then thrift flipping those to be more trans-seasonal and classic and things like that, I think that's a different thing. But I think all of that kind of consciousness and responsibility and reflexivity needs to be at play with all things, whether you're shopping for yourself or if you're shopping for that kind of market that Nyambo spoke about, and how we're creating this market out of secondhand clothes, and this kind of capitalist beast that kind of continues. And this is, I mean, I'm not perfect. I also love thrifting. I love buying clothes, and if you see an item that you're like, I need this, kind of thing, because clothes are political and clothes are all we have that everyone has and things like that. So I'm certainly not standing on a high horse here. I'm firmly on the ground, but just kind of being like, together we can do better.
Yeah, I think there were some really great tips in that, Emma, and thank you so much for sharing your take on thrifting and privilege. And I think one thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking as well was about thrift reselling, or like reselling thrifted items, which I have noticed so many like Instagram shops and online spaces popping up over the past year and a few years. And I think often, yeah, even in that space, if you're a thrift reseller, we need to be aware of privilege and where those items come from and whether we can pay it forward in any way. So I wondered if you could maybe speak a bit about, on the flip side of, yes, we consume thrifting as like individuals, or we thrift as individuals, but if you are maybe like a thrift reseller that's listening or know somebody, like, we also can be aware of that kind of privilege.
Sure, and I think this is kind of, for all things, it's a function of supply and availability. And that's kind of also acknowledging that what you see in a thrift store is a proportion of what that store might receive in donations, because there'll be stuff that's not suitable for anyone to wear, or not suitable for resale, or it's winter clothes and now it's summer, or they just don't have the space to have all the clothes. So kind of recognize what you see is a subset of what they have, and then of that, what is immediately trendy and accessible and things like that is a subset of that. And then, sorry, there's a train going past. And then kind of recognizing that all clothes from stores obviously sold in a size curve where the majority of sizes are kind of straight sizes in the middle, kind of with an average. And then because of another number of reasons, my experience is that at the secondhand market, that bell curve gets skewed even further, that there's even less representation for larger sizes and for smaller and petite sizes, just by virtue of you're amplifying an existing curve kind of further. There's also an underrepresentation of men's clothes, modest clothes, things like that. So you're kind of, you're working with already a limited subset. And then if resellers are going in, cherry picking from that to then resell for profit, I think, again, can be done in a sustainable way. If it's done in a large city where there's maybe multiple thrift stores and there's large groups of communities that are feeding into those thrift stores, fine, sure, could be all right. If it's been done in a small town where there aren't necessarily great alternatives, or the alternatives are like poor quality Chinese imports kind of thing, then that's maybe less responsible, because then you are kind of taking clothes out of the hands of people that may be able to afford it at the thrift store, but not necessarily at the reseller value. And I think there's also responsibility in that of, if you're sourcing from thrift stores, especially if they're kind of charity shops or if they're backing philanthropic, I think a portion of that should potentially go back to those thrift stores. Because if you're reselling it with the acknowledgement that you can get more for it on a more competitive market, or with the add-on of accessing potentially a higher DSM, or because you have the tech savvy to put it on Instagram, whereas the granny who's running the charity store might not have, you're acknowledging that it has a higher value, and you're capturing that value. So you're essentially getting your inputs for less than they're worth. And obviously acknowledging, like, yeah, a portion of that is your work and the work of listing it and things like that, that's fine. But especially if it's coming from a charity, I think there is a duty of care for at least a proportion to go back to that. And not just the, oh, this is the stuff that I couldn't sell, so I'll send it back to the charity store. To have a duty of care to, whether it's a donation or a proportion, or saying like, oh, I got these items from hospice, like if you're looking for other stuff, head there, kind of thing. I think there is a duty of care to pay that forward, especially if you're profiting from it. Or even if you're just getting your like Instagram looks from it.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree with that. I think also, like, in terms of, so Jackie put a question and said, in South Africa, where do we, where do our clothes come from that we thrift, and like, is it transparent? So for me, I think, like, if you're getting it from like the piles or a charity store, then you definitely, if we're talking about South Africa, you should definitely be paying it forward. Whereas like it can be different in different countries, I think. But like in South Africa, a lot of like charity store clothes are from other like people within that area that will like donate. But with like the piles, that's more like bulk bought, imported, and that's less like transparent around like which countries it's coming from. To what, like, I know, to my knowledge. But then, that's my train of thought. I was gonna say, like, oh no, I already have my train of thought. You know where I was going?
Not quite.
Damn. But yeah, no, okay, I'm not good.
Okay. Should we wrap up? Or do you want to come back to it? Okay, cool. Yeah, if you remember, then just interrupt me. It's 22. Cool. I think we are pretty much at the end of our session. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. Unless Emma or Nyambo, you want to add anything just to wrap it up, or anything you've been thinking about while you've been speaking? Nyambo, Emma?
I'll just say that kind of despite these criticisms, I don't want to demonize thrifting. I think like all all consumption needs to be thoughtful and sustainable, whether that's buying local, buying international, buying fast fashion kind of thing. And I think that's, as a society, an attitude that we've lost with regards to clothes. If you look back in the kind of 1950s, kind of pre kind of mass consumerism culture, our culture, our attitude towards clothes has changed so dramatically. And I think that's really at the heart of any kind of unsustainable clothing culture. And I think keeping that in mind of, do I need this item? Do I need a new item? Am I taking care of the item that I have? Sorry, my cat is sitting on my mouse. Is like, do I have, if I'm buying something, like, will I look after it in a way that then if I do pass it on down the road, it'll still be in a good condition, and so on and so forth. And I think that applies to buying new. It applies to, like, am I going to get enough wears out of it? All these questions apply regardless of what clothes you're buying. And I think there is a version of an attitude where thrifting is unsustainable, and there's a version of an attitude where buying fast fashion can be sustainable. And I think that's down to personal individual choices. And I think demonizing or exalting either version in a black and white way is I think not sustainable. And I think it kind of comes back to, I think a lot of the points that are going to go into the resource that Masego and Stella are putting together. A lot of it comes to how we treat our clothes and our attitude towards those clothes. And if that means going out and thrifting, if it means buying new, if it means not buying at all or swapping and things like that, that's really down to like an internal reflection on your needs, your privilege, your accessibility, your financial situation, all these points. And I think like society needs to catch up to that. And I think being able to feel empowered to make that decision, whether it means buying fast fashion because H&M is the only thing that caters towards a super petite size, and you haven't been able to find jeans in a thrift store and you're going to wear these jeans because you need black jeans for work, like, that's fine. I'm not going to hold that against you. But yeah, exactly. Be reflective, be conscious, be sustainable. End point, done.
Nyambo, is there anything that you wanted to add as a last thought?
Just a small thing. I just want to say also, I mean, like you said, we need to be responsible as well, and also understanding that when we buy, that garment, we need to understand how many people are we taking out of the jobs, how many, people who are going to bed hungry because of, us, making this normalizing and like this secondhand coming. Let's just try and clean what we have already on our continent. We have a lot already going here. We can't be cleaning up for others, and we can't be, we can't continue being second. Let's try to be the first, at least for once. So when we buy that garment, we need to understand how many factories they are closing because of that. So those are like, we need to understand. When all those garments coming in, a lot they closing a lot of industry. And yeah.
Yeah, I definitely I feel that even though there isn't a lack of secondhand clothes, I really have to learn there's no need for me to spend that much money on a whole bunch of clothes that I wouldn't really wear, and rather save it and spend it on a local brand. That's something that I feel, I guess, I've learned through my journey, but it's good to reaffirm that feeling.
Yeah. And I think if anything, the takeaway from this conversation is really also that slow fashion is not a one size fits all thing, and for everybody it means something different depending on where you come from, depending on your experience through life, depending on your accessibility and privilege. And I think that Emma put it really beautifully, that we can't be shaming people because of the choices they make. It's a much bigger systemic problem, and we really need to be rather celebrating all of the alternatives and how they fit together in a bigger tapestry of change. So I think we're going to end it on that. I think our time's up, but we wanted to just mention that we know that we couldn't touch on all the complexities of the secondhand conversation in this short time. So we have put together just a brief PDF resource. It's like 2 pages. The one page is just places you can read more about the global secondhand trade and the nuances of that. And then the second page is just a few tips for how we can all be more thoughtful and responsible thrifters. So I hope it's useful, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. And thank you so much, so much to Emma and Nyambo for joining us and sharing their stories with us as well. Yeah.
Thank you.